The throne room was made of crystal that glowed with soft blue light. It stretched high into the darkness above, and the walls hummed with energy that made the air feel heavy. Commander Jack stood at attention near the entrance, his boots clicking on the smooth floor as he was led forward by 4 guards with scales that shimmered like oil on water. He had been on alien worlds before. He had fought in the border wars and survived things that still visited him in his dreams, but he had never stood before a being like Empress of the Empire. She sat on a throne that seemed to grow from the floor itself, her long silver robes pooling around her feet. Her skin was pale blue, almost white, and her eyes were solid black with tiny stars floating inside them. When she looked at him, Jack felt like she was reading every thought he had ever had. Behind the throne stood a younger. She was smaller, with the same pale skin but with silver eyes instead of black. Her hair flowed down her back like liquid metal, and she watched Jack with open curiosity. This was Princess, the reason Jack had been brought across half the galaxy. The Empress rose from her throne and walked down the steps toward him. She moved like water, smooth and silent. The guards stepped back, leaving Jack alone in the center of the room. He kept his eyes forward and his hands at his sides. He had been told not to speak unless spoken to. He had been told that one wrong word could mean his death. He had been told many things, but Jack had learned long ago that actions mattered more than words. Circled him slowly. She was taller than him by at least a foot, and when she leaned close, he could smell something like flowers mixed with metal. Her breath was cold against his ear. "You are the human they sent me," she said. Her voice was soft, but it filled the entire room. "You are the one they say cannot be broken." Jack did not respond. He had not been asked a question. The Empress smiled, showing teeth that were just slightly too sharp. "You may speak, Commander. I wish to hear your voice." "I am Commander Jack, Your Majesty," he said. "Earth Defense Force, Special Operations Division. I have been assigned to protect Princess for as long as you require my services." "Assigned," the Empress repeated. She said the word like it tasted strange in her mouth. "You did not volunteer for this duty." "I go where I am needed, Your Majesty. Volunteering is not required when the mission is clear." The princess stepped forward from behind the throne. She moved down the steps and stopped beside her mother, studying Jack with her head tilted to one side. Up close, she looked young. Jack guessed she was the equivalent of a human teenager, though he knew lived for thousands of years. "Mother said, this creature has no armor. He has no scales or natural weapons. His mind is closed to us, which means he cannot sense danger before it arrives. How is he supposed to protect me when he cannot even protect himself?" The Empress placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "That is exactly why I chose him, my child. The assassins of the Dominion have tried to kill you 3 times. They have failed only because of luck. My guards are strong, but they can read minds. They know what we will do before we do it." She turned back to Jack, her dark eyes studying him like he was a puzzle she was trying to solve. "But they cannot read human minds. Your species thinks in patterns we do not understand. Your brains are chaos wrapped in flesh. They will not see this one coming." Did not look convinced. She walked around Jack the same way her mother had, looking at his simple uniform and his weathered face. She stopped in front of him and stared up into his eyes. "You have scars," she said. "Many of them you have been hurt before." "Yes, Princess." "And yet you are still alive. How?" Jack considered the question. He thought about the battles he had fought, the friends he had lost, the nights he had spent bleeding in the dirt waiting for extraction that might never come. He thought about the human stubborn refusal to die that had kept him going when his body wanted to quit. "I keep fighting," he said simply, "until the fight is over." The princess frowned. "That is not a strategy, that is stupidity." "Maybe," Jack agreed, "but it has worked so far." The Empress laughed. It was a strange sound like wind chimes in a storm. "I like this one. He does not try to impress us with big words or empty promises. He simply is what he is." She returned to her throne and sat down, her robes arranging themselves around her like living things. "Commander, you will be given quarters near my daughter's chambers. You will accompany her everywhere she goes. You will sleep when she sleeps and wake when she wakes. You will taste her food before she eats and check every room before she enters. You will be her shadow, her shield, and her sword." "Understood, Your Majesty." "And Commander," the Empress added, her voice growing cold, "if any harm comes to my daughter, I will personally tear your species from the stars. Every human world will burn. Every human ship will be dust. I will erase your kind from history as if you never existed. Do you understand?" Jack met her eyes without flinching. He had been threatened before by beings far less powerful than her. He had learned that threats were just words until someone acted on them. "I understand, Your Majesty, but that will not be necessary. No harm will come to Princess while I am alive." The Empress studied him for a long moment, then she nodded slowly. "We shall see, human, we shall see." As Jack was led away to his new quarters, he felt the princess's silver eyes following him. She was curious about him, he could tell. She had never met a human before, and everything about him confused her. He was soft where were hard. He was short where they were tall. He was mortal where they were nearly eternal. But Jack had spent his entire career proving that size and strength were not everything. He had watched human soldiers hold lines against impossible odds. He had seen medics run into fire to save wounded comrades. He had witnessed pilots crash their ships into enemy vessels rather than let them reach human colonies. Humans were strange creatures. They formed bonds with anything, fought for causes that were not their own, and died for people they had just met. The galaxy did not understand them yet, but Jack had a feeling that was about to change. He reached his quarters, a small room with a bed, a desk, and a window that looked out into the endless stars. Somewhere out there, the Dominion was planning their next attack. Somewhere out there, assassins were sharpening their blades and studying their target. They would come for the princess eventually. Jack was certain of that, and when they came, he would be ready. Not because he was stronger or faster or smarter than them, but because he had made a promise and humans did not break their promises. He lay down on the bed and closed his eyes. Sleep came quickly, as it always did. He had learned to rest when he could because he never knew when the next battle would begin. In his dreams, he saw fire and blood and the faces of friends long dead. But he did not wake. He had made peace with his ghosts years ago. Tomorrow, his real work would begin. 3 months passed aboard the royal vessel, and Jack learned what it meant to be invisible. The guards ignored him like he was furniture. They walked past him in hallways without a glance. They spoke about him in their own language, not knowing he had spent his first week memorizing every word he heard. They called him the soft one and made bets on how long he would last before he broke down and begged to go home. Jack did not mind. He had been underestimated his entire life. It was almost comfortable. Princess treated him the same way at first. She went about her days as if he did not exist. She attended her lessons in diplomacy and warfare. She practiced with energy weapons in the training halls. She met with advisors and nobles and ambassadors from distant worlds. And through it all, Jack followed 10 steps behind, watching everything and saying nothing. The royal vessel was called the Eternal Dawn, and it was the size of a small city. It held thousands of and traveled between star systems on missions of diplomacy and trade. The princess had her own wing of the ship, with gardens that grew plants from 100 worlds and windows that showed the stars streaming past like rivers of light. It was beautiful in a cold, perfect way that made Jack miss the messy green forests of Earth. He slept 4 hours each night, never more. He ate when the princess ate, always tasting her food first even though they laughed at the practice. He checked every room she entered, every corridor she walked, every person who came within 20 feet of her. He memorized the faces of the crew and learned which ones looked at the princess with respect and which ones looked at her with something darker. The princess noticed. She pretended not to, but Jack could see her watching him from the corner of her silver eyes. She saw how he positioned himself between her and every doorway. She saw how his hand moved toward his weapon whenever a stranger approached. She saw the way he scanned crowds like he was solving a puzzle, picking out threats before they revealed themselves. One evening she finally spoke to him. They were in her private garden, surrounded by flowers that glowed with soft bioluminescence. The princess sat on a bench made of living crystal, and Jack stood near the door as always. The silence between them had become familiar, almost comfortable. But tonight, something was different. "Human," she said without looking at him, "come here." Jack approached and stopped 3 feet away, close enough to hear, far enough to react if something went wrong. Old habits. "You never sleep," said. "I have checked the security logs, 4 hours, sometimes less. How do you function?" Training, princess. The body learns to adapt. Adapt? She repeated the word like it was strange to her. Do not need to adapt. We are born perfect for our purposes. We do not change. That must be nice, Jack said. There was no sarcasm in his voice. He meant it. The princess turned to look at him directly for the first time since his arrival. Her silver eyes seemed to glow in the dim light of the garden. "You confuse me, Commander. You have no telepathy, no natural weapons, no armor. You're as laughably short. And yet you stand here, ready to die for someone you do not even know. I know you well enough, princess. You know nothing about me. I know you read poetry when you cannot sleep, Jack said quietly. I know you hate the formal dinners because the nobles bore you with their politics. I know you miss your father, even though you never speak of him. I know you are afraid of disappointing your mother, and I know you practice with weapons twice as long as your instructors require because you want to be ready when the next attack comes. Stared at him. For a moment, her perfect composure cracked, and Jack saw something vulnerable beneath the surface. How do you know these things? I watch, princess. It is my job to know you better than you know yourself. Only then can I protect you. The princess was silent for a long time. The glowing flowers swayed gently in the recycled air, and somewhere in the distance, Jack could hear the hum of the ship's engines. Finally, spoke again, her voice softer than before. My mother says humans are pack hunters. She says you evolved to throw yourselves into danger for your tribe. She says it is instinct, not choice. Maybe, Jack admitted, but I like to think we choose it anyway. Instinct tells us to protect each other. Choice tells us who deserves that protection. And you have chosen to protect me, a princess of an empire that threatens to destroy your entire species if you fail. Jack smiled slightly. It was the first time he had smiled since arriving on the ship. I have protected worse people for worse reasons, princess. At least you are polite. Almost laughed. She caught herself, but Jack saw the corner of her mouth twitch upward. You are strange, Commander. All humans are strange, but perhaps that is not entirely a bad thing. From that night forward, things changed between them. Still did not speak to him often, but when she did, there was warmth in her voice that had not been there before. She asked him questions about Earth, about human culture, about the wars he had fought. Jack answered honestly, leaving out only the parts that would give her nightmares. He told her about his home, a small town in the mountains where the air was clean and the winters were long. He told her about his family, parents who had died when he was young and a sister who still wrote him letters that took months to arrive across the vastness of space. He told her about the first time he had seen an alien, how terrified and amazed he had been, how small he had felt under the stars. Listened to everything. She was a good listener, better than most nobles he had met. She asked questions that showed she was paying attention, and she remembered things he had said days or weeks earlier. Slowly, Jack realized that the princess was lonely. She was surrounded by servants and guards and advisors, but none of them truly knew her. None of them treated her like a person instead of a symbol. He tried not to get attached. Attachment was dangerous in his line of work. People he cared about had a habit of dying, and he had learned to keep his heart locked away where it could not be hurt, but made it difficult. She was curious and clever and surprisingly kind beneath her royal mask. She reminded him of his sister, in a way, someone who deserved better than the life they had been given. The weeks turned into months, and Jack settled into his role. He was still invisible to most of the crew, still mocked by the guards, still treated like a pet brought aboard for amusement. But the princess saw him differently now. She saw the man behind the uniform, the soldier behind the scars. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, the Dominion was watching. Their spies had reported the human's presence. Their assassins were studying his patterns. They did not understand what he was or why he had been brought to protect the princess. But they would learn. Soon enough, they would learn exactly what humans were capable of when the people they protected were in danger. Jack could feel it coming, the calm before the storm. He checked his weapons each night and memorized escape routes through the ship. He watched the shadows more carefully than ever before. The attack would come, he was certain of it. And when it did, he would be ready. The Festival of Moons was the largest diplomatic gathering in the sector. It was held on Prime, a neutral station that floated in the empty space between three great empires. For 1 week each year, enemies became guests, and the business of peace was conducted over wine and music and careful words. Princess had been invited to represent the empire. It was her first official diplomatic mission, and the entire station was watching. Thousands of aliens from 100 species filled the grand ballroom, their voices creating a constant hum that made Jack's head ache. He stayed close to the princess, scanning the crowd with eyes that never stopped moving. The ballroom was vast, with ceilings that disappeared into darkness and walls made of some material that shifted colors like oil on water. Servants moved through the crowd carrying trays of food and drink. Dignitaries in elaborate costumes gathered in groups, laughing and making deals that would shape the future of worlds. Somewhere, a band played music that sounded like crystal bells and distant thunder. Jack hated it. There were too many people, too many angles, too many places for an assassin to hide. The guards had spread out around the room, but Jack knew they were not enough. They were watching for threats, for the kind of attacks they understood. They were not watching for The Dominion was a coalition of species that had been at war with the Empire for centuries. They were shapeshifters and telepaths, masters of deception and infiltration. Their assassins were legendary. They could wear the face of a friend and strike before anyone knew they were there. Jack had studied everything he could find about them. He had memorized their body language, their speech patterns, the tiny tells that gave them away even in perfect disguise. It was not much, but it was something. The princess was standing near the center of the room, speaking with a group of ambassadors from the Federation. She was wearing a gown of silver and white that made her look like starlight given form. She was smiling and nodding, playing her role perfectly, but Jack could see the tension in her shoulders. She did not like crowds any more than he did. He scanned the servants moving through the ballroom. Most of them were locals, hired for the festival and gone by morning. They carried their trays with the casual efficiency of people who had done this work 1,000 times. Their movements were natural, unhurried. But 3 of them were different. Jack saw it in the way they moved, too smooth, too precise. Their eyes swept the room with purpose, always returning to the princess. They positioned themselves in a triangle, slowly closing the distance between them and their target. Jack's hand moved to his sidearm. It was a simple ballistic weapon, outdated by galactic standards. Most species had moved on to plasma and energy weapons centuries ago, but ballistic rounds did not need to charge, did not glow before firing, and traveled faster than the eye could follow. There was something to be said for old technology. He started moving toward the princess, cutting through the crowd as politely as he could. People stepped aside, looking at him with confusion and annoyance. The guards noticed his movement and began to converge as well, but they did not know what he had seen. They did not understand the danger. The first assassin moved. His hand came up from beneath his tray, holding a plasma blade that hummed with deadly energy. He was 10 feet from the princess and closing fast. Jack drew his weapon and fired in a single motion. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, a sharp crack that cut through the music and conversation like a knife. The assassin dropped, a hole in his chest where his heart should have been. The crowd screamed. People ran in every direction, crashing into each other in their panic. The second assassin drew his blade and lunged for the princess, but Jack was already there. He shoved behind a stone pillar and turned to face the attacker. 2 more shots and the second assassin fell. But the third was faster. He had used the chaos to close the distance, and now he was coming around the pillar with his blade raised. Jack tried to turn, tried to bring his weapon around, but he was too slow. The plasma blade sliced across his arm, burning through flesh and muscle. The pain was unlike anything he had felt before, white-hot and absolute. Jack dropped his gun. His arm would not respond to his commands, the nerves destroyed by the heat. But he was not done fighting. He never stopped fighting. He caught the assassin's wrist with his good hand and twisted, redirecting the blade away from the princess. They struggled, the superior strength forcing Jack backward. The assassin's face was changing now, his disguise failing as he focused all his energy on the kill. Beneath the mask of a harmless servant was something reptilian and cold, with eyes like black glass. Jack head-butted him. The impact shattered his own nose and sent blood streaming down his face, but it worked. The assassin stumbled, his grip loosening for just a moment. Jack drew his combat knife with his good hand and drove it into his chest. They fell together, crashing to the floor in a tangle of limbs and blood. Jack could feel his strength fading, the blood loss making his vision blur around the edges. But he forced himself to move, to crawl over the dying assassin and shield the princess with his body. There could be more of them. There were always more of them. Was pressed against the pillar, her silver eyes wide with shock. She was unharmed. That was all that mattered. The guards arrived seconds later, their weapons drawn and their faces grim. They surrounded the pillar, scanning for additional threats. Medical drones descended from somewhere above, their lights flashing as they analyzed Jack's injuries. Commander whispered, her voice was shaking, "You are hurt." "I am fine, princess." The words came out slurred. The blood loss was getting worse. You saved me. You could have run. You could have saved yourself. Jack tried to smile, but his face was not cooperating. That was never an option, Princess. Never. The medical drones began their work, injecting him with something that dulled the pain and slowed the bleeding. He could feel consciousness slipping away, but he fought it. He needed to stay awake. He needed to make sure she was safe. Rest, Commander said. Her hand touched his face, gentle and warm. You have done enough. Rest now. Jack wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her that the mission was not complete, that he could not rest until she was back on the ship and surrounded by guards. But his body had other ideas. The darkness closed in, and the last thing he saw before he passed out was the princess standing over him, her silver eyes filled with tears. He had kept his promise. She was alive. Everything else could wait. Jack woke in a medical bay that smelled like antiseptic and something that he could not identify. The lights were dim, and the walls pulsed with soft blue energy. He tried to sit up, but his body refused to cooperate. Everything hurt. His arm was wrapped in some kind of regenerative gel that hummed quietly as it worked. His ribs were bound with strips of material that glowed faintly. His face felt wrong, rebuilt by machines he did not understand. He was alive. That surprised him more than it should have. The door to the medical bay opened, and two guards entered. They were followed by a figure that made Jack's breath catch in his throat. Empress herself, still wearing the ceremonial robes she had worn to the festival. Her dark eyes swept the room and settled on him with an intensity that made him feel like a specimen under glass. Leave us, she said to the guards. They hesitated for only a moment before obeying. When the door closed behind them, the Empress approached Jack's bed and stood looking down at him. You are awake, she said. It was not a question. Your Majesty. Jack tried to bow his head, but even that small movement sent pain shooting through his skull. Do not move, Commander. The medical drones say you have a fractured skull, 3 broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and severe burns along your right arm. By the standards of your species, you should be dead. My species is stubborn, Your Majesty. The Empress did not smile. She pulled a chair from somewhere and sat down beside his bed, her robes pooling around her feet like liquid silver. For a long moment she simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. My daughter has not left this ship since we returned from Prime, she said finally. She has been sitting outside this medical bay for 12 hours, waiting for you to wake. My guards tried to convince her to rest, but she refused. She said she owed you a debt that could not be repaid with sleep. Jack closed his eyes. She owes me nothing, Your Majesty. I was doing my job. Your job? The Empress repeated the words slowly as if tasting them. Yes, that is what I wish to speak with you about. She leaned forward, her dark eyes boring into his. I have ruled the Empire for 1,000 years, Commander. I have seen species rise and fall. I have watched stars die and new ones be born. I have met warriors from every corner of the galaxy, beings with strength and speed and powers that your primitive mind cannot comprehend. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer than Jack had ever heard it. But I have never met anyone like you. Jack said nothing. He did not know what to say. My advisors told me the probability of your survival in that attack was less than 12%, the Empress continued. 3 assassins, armed with plasma blades, against 1 human with a primitive weapon and no armor. The logical choice would have been to flee, to save yourself and let my daughter die. You would have been forgiven. No one expects a human to stand against the... With respect, Your Majesty, Jack said quietly, logic had nothing to do with it. Then what did? The Empress leaned closer, her eyes searching his face. Help me understand, human. Why did you not run? Why did you throw yourself into a fight you could not win? Why did you nearly die for a princess of a species that has threatened to destroy your entire world? Jack was silent for a long moment. He thought about the question carefully because he knew it deserved a careful answer. The Empress was not asking out of curiosity. She genuinely wanted to understand something that was beyond her experience. Because I gave you my word, he said finally. Words are vapor, the Empress replied. They cost nothing to speak and nothing to break. Every species in the galaxy makes promises they do not intend to keep. It is the nature of politics, of survival. No one truly believes that words have power. Jack met her eyes. His vision was still blurry around the edges and his body was screaming for rest, but he forced himself to stay focused. This moment mattered. He could feel it. Maybe that is true for other species, he said, but not for humans, not for me. The Empress studied him in silence. Outside the medical bay, Jack could hear the soft hum of the ship's engines and the distant sounds of crew members moving through the corridors. Life continuing as normal, even while everything had changed. "You truly mean it," said at last. There was something like wonder in her voice. "You truly believe that a promise is unbreakable, that words have weight." "Yes, Your Majesty. Even when the cost of keeping that promise is your own life. Especially then." The Empress rose from her chair and walked to the window. Outside, the stars streamed past like rivers of light, each one a sun with worlds of its own. She stood with her back to him, her shoulders straight and her hands clasped behind her. "When I was young," she said quietly, "my mother told me that the universe is cold and empty. She said that every species fights for survival and that mercy is a weakness that leads to extinction. She said that the only truth is power and the only law is strength." She turned back to face him, and Jack saw something in her eyes that had not been there before, something like respect. "I have believed those words for 1,000 years, Commander. I have built my empire on them. I have crushed my enemies and conquered worlds because I believed that only power mattered." She walked back to his bedside and looked down at him. "But you have made me question that belief. You have shown me something I did not think existed. A being who keeps his word not because he fears punishment, but because he believes it is right. A warrior who fights not for power or glory, but because he has made a promise." Jack did not know what to say. He had never been good with words, especially not in moments like this. "My daughter is alive because of you," the Empress continued. "My empire's future is secure because a single human refused to run. I do not know how to repay that debt, Commander. I do not know if it can be repaid." "There is no debt, Your Majesty. I was doing what humans do. We protect the people we are responsible for. We keep our promises. It is not special. It is just who we are." The Empress smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed her face from cold and regal to something almost warm. "Perhaps that is what makes it special, Commander. Perhaps the fact that you do not see it as extraordinary is what makes it extraordinary." She turned and walked toward the door. Before she left, she paused and looked back at him over her shoulder. "Rest now, Commander. When you are healed, we will speak again. There are things I wish to discuss with you, things that concern the future of your species and mine." She left, and the door closed softly behind her. Jack lay in the darkness, listening to the hum of the medical equipment and the beat of his own heart. He thought about what the Empress had said, about words and promises and the things that made humans different from the rest of the galaxy. He did not have answers. He had never been good at philosophy, but he knew one thing for certain. He had kept his promise, was alive, and whatever came next he would face it the same way he faced everything else. One step at a time, one promise at a time. Until the fight was over. The grand amphitheater of the could hold 10,000 beings, and today every seat was filled. Representatives from across the empire had gathered to witness something unprecedented. Ambassadors from allied worlds sat in the upper galleries, their faces curious and uncertain. Nobles in elaborate robes lined the lower levels, whispering to each other in voices too quiet to hear. And at the center of it all, on a raised platform of polished crystal, stood Empress in full ceremonial regalia. Jack stood at attention before her, wearing the simple dress uniform of the Earth Defense Force. His wounds had healed, though the scars remained. Thin silver lines traced across his arm where the plasma blade had burned through flesh and muscle. His nose was slightly crooked where the bones had been reset. But he stood straight and tall, his eyes forward and his hands at his sides. He had tried to refuse this ceremony. He had told the Empress that he did not need recognition, that he had simply done his duty. She had listened to his arguments with a patient smile and then told him that refusing was not an option. Humans, she said, might not care about honors and titles, but the galaxy needed to see what humanity was capable of. So here he was, standing before 10,000 aliens who watched him like he was some kind of exotic animal. He could hear them whispering about him. The human, the soft one, the impossible soldier who had killed 3 assassins with primitive weapons and his bare hands. The Empress raised her hand, and the amphitheater fell silent. "Today we gather to witness history," she said. Her voice filled the vast space, amplified by technology that made it seem to come from everywhere at once. "For the first time in 1,000 years, a being from outside our species will be named to the Royal Guard. This human has proven himself worthy of an honor that many of our own warriors spend their entire lives pursuing." The crowd murmured. Some of them did not approve. Jack could see it in their faces, the doubt and resentment. How could a human, a member of such a young and primitive species, stand among the greatest warriors of the Empire? Before the Empress could continue, Princess stepped forward. She was wearing a gown of deep blue that made her silver eyes shine like stars. Her hair flowed down her back like liquid moonlight. She looked every inch the royal princess, but when she spoke, her voice trembled slightly with emotion. "Mother," she said, "before you continue, I would like to speak." The Empress paused. This was not part of the ceremony. The crowd murmured again, louder this time. A princess addressing the assembly directly was highly unusual, but nodded slowly and stepped aside. Walked to the edge of the platform and looked out at the assembled multitude. 10,000 faces stared back at her, waiting to hear what she would say. "When I was young," she began, "my tutors taught me about the species of the galaxy. They taught me about the born with telepathy and strength and the wisdom of ages. They taught me about the with their technology and their logic. They taught me about the with their shape-shifting and their cunning." She paused, her silver eyes sweeping across the crowd. "And they taught me about the humans. A young species," they said, "primitive and weak, short-lived and fragile, barely worth noticing in the grand sweep of galactic history." The human ambassadors in the upper galleries shifted uncomfortably. Jack kept his eyes forward, his face betraying nothing. "I believed what I was taught," continued. "When my mother assigned a human to protect me, I thought it was a joke. A human, with no armor and no telepathy and no natural weapons. How could such a creature possibly keep me safe?" She turned to look at Jack, and something in her expression made the amphitheater fall completely silent. "I was wrong. I was so terribly, wonderfully wrong." She walked toward Jack and stopped a few feet away, facing him directly. Then she turned back to the crowd and raised her hand, pointing at the human soldier with a gesture that carried the weight of empires. "Look at him," she said. "Look at this human. He has scars that would break a lesser being. He has survived wounds that should have killed him 3 times over. And he did it all to protect someone he barely knew, someone from a species that threatened to destroy his world if he failed." Her voice grew stronger, ringing through the amphitheater like a bell. "I watched this man stand against 3 assassins. I watched him fight when any rational being would have run. I watched him shield me with his own body, bleeding and broken, because he had given his word that he would protect me." She paused, and when she spoke again, there were tears in her silver eyes. "My tutors were wrong about humanity. Our textbooks are wrong. Everything we thought we knew about this species is wrong." She raised her arm and pointed at Jack again, and this time her voice carried across the amphitheater like thunder. "When your empires crumble, when your fleets burn, when your champions fall, look to the humans. They will be the last ones standing, not because they are the strongest or the fastest but because when a human gives you their word, when they take you under their protection, they do not stop. They do not yield. They do not surrender." The crowd was utterly silent. No one moved, no one breathed. "Humanity is young," said. "Humanity is small. They live short lives on a single pale world at the edge of the galaxy, but any empire wise enough to call them allies will never fall, because humans do not abandon the people they protect. Humans do not break their promises. Humans fight until the fight is over, and then they get up and fight again." She turned to face Jack directly, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, gratitude, respect. "Commander Jack," she said, "you saved my life. But more than that, you showed me what humanity truly is. You showed me that strength is not measured in armor or weapons or the number of years you live. Strength is measured in the things you are willing to die for." She stepped back and took her place beside her mother. The Empress was smiling, a rare expression on her ancient face. "Commander," said, "kneel." Jack knelt on one knee, his head bowed. The Empress drew a blade of pure light from somewhere within her robes and touched it to each of his shoulders. "Rise, Commander. Rise as the first human member of the Royal Guard. Rise and take your place among the greatest warriors the galaxy has ever known." Jack rose. The amphitheater erupted in applause, hesitant at first, then building into a roar that shook the very walls. 10,000 voices raised in acknowledgement of something they had never expected to see. A human standing among giants. A human honored for nothing more than keeping his word. Jack Met's eyes across the platform. She smiled at him and he nodded back, a warrior's acknowledgement, a protector's promise renewed. Because that was what humans did. They stood, they fought, they kept their word. And across the galaxy, in throne rooms and council chambers and military academies, beings were beginning to understand what that truly meant. The age of humanity was just beginning, and the galaxy would never be the same.